So my experience with this has been going back now since 2015, so predating the original China initiative, because even before the China initiative was named the China initiative, there has been a focus by the Department of Justice on what they perceive as threats from China, and those threats taking the form of theft of intellectual property and economic espionage. And they are, the US government is incredibly frightened and concerned and focused on preventing US intellectual property from being stolen and taken by China. And by all accounts, there, we read the paper, there is a nation state, the Chinese government taking actions and sponsoring espionage of the United States, where they're hacking into the intellectual property of large corporations and the US government itself and stealing that. And so I've prefaced that by saying, I think it's important to understand where this concern is coming from. And I'm certainly not in a position to be dismissive of that. And I take it at face value, those allegations. And I read the same cases or stories about those that the rest of us do. But what has happened is that in an attempt to clamp down on this theft of intellectual property and economic espionage, it developed into the China initiative. And the initial, when they rolled out this program, they said they wanted every U.S. attorney's office, there's 93 U.S. attorney's offices in the United States. They said they expected every office to bring 1 or 2 cases per year. I mean, that is not the way you develop a program, because when you put a number on it, then you're not investigating crime. You're looking for crime. You're looking for examples. It's just like if you're on the side of the highway and state troopers have a quota, and we all know what happens then. You're going 3 miles over the speed limit. You get a ticket because that trooper has a quota. Well, these U.S. attorneys in some remote parts of the country that did not have big research facilities are being told, you need to bring a case. And they don't have big examples of economic espionage going on in their district. So what do? They still have to bring a case, or they're feeling pressure to bring a case, and they train their targets to professors and researchers. And they did this with a fundamental lack of understanding about what professors do and what researchers do. And the idea of collaboration to them sounded like you're giving away their secrets. You're being paid by NIH to do research, and now you're just giving it away to these Chinese colleagues of yours. I mean, to those of you who are researchers, it's maybe even humorous. But if you're an FBI agent, I remember the very first case, one of the very first cases I had, Professor Xiaoxing Shi from Temple University was being interviewed by the FBI after he got arrested. And they were asking him about, he's taking samples of his, he was doing these thin films that he was developing that would be used for, I can't even remember what the terminology is now, but they were shocked when he was confessing, they thought confessing, that he would take these films and share them with scientists around the world. And, you know, they thought they had a confession. You know, so they simply do not understand that fundamental research, the nature of it is you do the research and you share the results. And they also don't understand that these research are not developing applied science where they're trying to make a device or solve a particular problem. They're doing fundamental research. So you combine these different pieces with a lack of understanding about what researchers do, and these agents who are highly motivated to find what they call economic espionage, and they target these professors. And the way they did it is they would go to their research grants and they'd scrutinize the paperwork and look to see if there was unreported affiliations in China. And that's what, you know, many of my clients, in fact, almost all of those clients were actually caught up on, you know, alleged misrepresentations for not reporting that back in 2013, they were working at a university in China and they were getting grants from the National Science Foundation. And as a result, they say, we've got you on wire fraud, we've got you on false statements, and you know, you're looking at 20 years in prison. And you know, this has resulted in the prosecution of scores of professors, and I represented a great many of them. Now, many of these cases did not end up in actual criminal charges, and we were able to persuade the government not to charge them, or getting dismissals of cases that were brought. And then in the case of Franklin Tao, you know, we went to trial and we were able to get an acquittal. But that took 5 years of work, 5 years of fighting in the courts and then appealing to the 10th Circuit before we could get Franklin acquitted. And that also doesn't take into account hundreds of researchers who have been run out by NIH, National Science Foundation, debarred, their funding cut off. They're not able to get US funding. And as a result, they're out of a job. And the only place that they can go at that point is, ironically, China. So the perverse impact of this so-called China initiative, which is intended to prevent U.S. brain power being siphoned off by the Chinese, has the exact opposite effect, where it made the U.S. so inhospitable, has made the U.S. so inhospitable to some of our most talented researchers and scientists, that these individuals have had to relocate, and in every case, reluctantly and sadly, nobody wanted to go back to China. But they really had no choice, and they have left their families behind, and they come back and forth, but they now are working in China for Chinese research labs.
Thank you very much. I also want to recognize Professor Franklin Tao, who is one of Peter's clients. Later on, when you have a chance, we would like for you to say a few words. The second guest we want to talk about is Professor Scott Rozelle from Stanford University. He's a prominent economist, expert on China's economic development, education, and health. And some of this project that he got notable for is the Rural Education Action Program and the China Health and Nutrition Survey. Scott has off and on spent 30 years in China. And I joked previously when we met that his Chinese is much better than mine. He recommended increased investment in rural education for China and healthcare, and implement target health intervention and so on. In many ways, Scott has helped the development of China quite a bit. So my question to him is to talk about your experience with helping rural China to develop its program and your impression of China's development over these years that you have been there. And one kind of pointed question is China the enemy or just a competitor?
Thank you, Joel. Yeah, it's really nice to be here. I actually want to take those questions. I would need 45 minutes. We were talking about to do, but build a little on the China initiative. And what I want to do real quick is, you asked me to talk a little about what I do, and this is sort of how the integration of China with the rest of the world helped China. But then it's the opposite too of the integration. How the immigrants from the world have really had the U.S. blossom, and so I work on rural China. I've worked actually since 1981, so it's 40 years, and I wish it was 30 years. And but what we do is we take the best people in the world on an issue like nutritional problems of rural kids in rural schools, and we found out that 47% of rural kids, this was 110 million kids, had anemia. So this is iron deficiency anemia. And we started doing big randomized trials, go to 100 schools, and 50 schools give them a vitamin a day, and 50 schools don't give them anything. And not only did their anemia go down, the Ministry of Education doesn't care about that. They care about math scores. The math scores went up. And then it ended up evolving into a free nutritious lunch program. And in 2012, 2013, the Wen Jiabao, Liu Yendong was the vice premier, pushed out $5 billion, 21 million kids every day getting a nutritious lunch. Now it's 39 million kids every day getting a nutritious lunch. And the anemia rate in rural China has gone from 47% to 5%, lower than the United States, right? And so, this is collaboration work that's doing on, and it happened in other areas of intestinal worms, of early childhood development, and that happens there. It happens the other way around too. I'm an economist, academic economist, and I really can't even talk without a PowerPoint. But so I brought a paper that I wrote, and I want to talk about what this paper talks about. It was part of a track 2 diplomacy that Joe Biden approved of and Xi Jinping approved of implementing scholarly exchange after the China initiative really hurt it. And so how do we get this going? And what my job was to do is to say, why is this important, and how has it been important to the U.S.? And international collaboration drives technology. It drives growth in countries. And basically, I went through the whole literature, and what we found was, over the last 15 years, Lee and Hapt, Jia, Tong and Shapira, the National Science Foundation are papers that documented this enormous collaboration between China and the U.S. that pushed forward publications, citations, new technologies, and growth in the country. From 1992 to 2007, the United States GDP went up by 1% more per year because of our interactions with China. I mean, that's just U.S.-China, relations, and it's based on academics to academics, but also students, the student exchange. In 2011, there were 88,000 Chinese graduate students that came to the United States. By 2017, it was 137,000. And they were PhD students in science, engineering, social science, and that this drove U.S. Productivity in research and academics everywhere. And of course, are these the guys who are taking our information, are taking our findings and taking them back to China? 87.2% of the PhD students stayed here, right? They are in academics, they're in businesses, and they, by 10 years out of those, 97% of them become U.S. citizens. I mean, that's what this academic goes. And so on and on and on. Then what this paper does is it goes and says, what's happened after the China initiative? It's plummeted. U.S. publications, by the way, went down after that. Chinese publications continue to rise, but they fell. We went to the U.S. Embassy in Beijing last year talking about this group, and they said, oh no, we give out 92% of people who apply for visas, get visas to come to the U.S. And then we ask them, how many people that are applying for PhDs in engineering or science get visas? And they go, oh, we have to look at those very closely. It's basically less than 1/3 of them get their visa. And guess what happens? They go to Germany. They go to England. And now those programs are booming, and our labs, we have labs shut down. So this is a back and forth that you know is happening. And just one thing. So I have a very good friend who's an engineer in chemical engineering, and she has a big staff, and you know can barely run her program because she can't get Chinese PhD students in there now. And she also runs some Defense Department high national security projects. She has one. And she goes, I don't understand what people even worry about. So this project is over here, and it's managed, and it's that it's all within there. And the rest of our lab is open, and we publish, and it's for the whole world to go. And so this idea that you know, that we're giving up our secrets because of this interaction is, I think it's hurting us, it's hurting China, it's hurting the world, and I think that's where we really need to go to set this straight.
Our next speaker is Professor Peter Michelson. Peter is a professor of physics at Stanford University, and don't ask me what he does, but I cannot tell you. But I know that he has but I know that he is very keen about the U.S.-China relationship, and I know that Stanford University has been one of the leading institutions in trying to promote better relationship with U.S. and China. And I want him to please summarize Stanford University's concern about China initiative. In your field of research, you're used to international collaboration with the China initiative. Has it hindered your job? And lastly, I want him to talk about him and Professor Michelson from Stanford University, who has started a new initiative to talk to Congress, to write a letter, and urge all professors, all universities in America to talk to Congress because they are about to start another China initiative under the DOJ, Department of Justice. Would you go on, Professor Michelson?
Okay. Well, thank you. So I am a physicist by background. That's what I like to spend most of my time doing. And I thank you for the invitation to be on this panel. My main concern about the China initiative and its aftermath, and it's not over, we know that, is the impact on my colleagues at Stanford, many of whom are they're all, I want to say they're all outstanding scholars. Even scholars that have gone to Berkeley are outstanding, but I'll talk. But
Thank you.
okay, but
Berkeley,
anyway,
Berkeley grad.
But among my colleagues at Stanford in the science and engineering departments, and I'm particularly familiar with the science departments at Stanford. I used to be the senior associate dean for the sciences. Those that are immigrants from China who are U.S. citizens that collaborate across the world, collaborate among the colleagues in the United States, they're all absolutely outstanding. And today I'd say the large majority are frightened of it collaborating internationally, particularly with colleagues in China. They just don't do it largely. And I think that is harmful to the progress of the basic fundamental research that we're doing. And my university actually has a policy. I don't speak on behalf of the university, I have to be careful to say that. But we have a research policy handbook, and an important section of it is on openness of research, that we basically accept scholars from anywhere in the world, the best that will come, and the results of the research are intended to be published openly for the benefit of all those that are interested. That has not been impacted yet. That's still a policy at Stanford, and it should remain one, because to attract the best talent in the world from anywhere, including, in particular in this discussion, China, is very important for our mission as a university, which is to educate scholars, the future leaders in areas of science and technology. And that is important for the United States in the long term. And if we start harming that with things like the China Initiative, then I fear for the future of this country. So I really, now you asked me to talk about a letter. We've written lots of letters. Well, not that many, but one of my colleagues who's a theoretical physicist at Stanford, outstanding, works in areas of quantum materials, for example. He's had many outstanding students from China. Many of them stay, and a number have returned to China and are top scholars in China today. We've been concerned about the China Initiative since it started, and in 2022, we did organize a letter to the U.S. Attorney General that was endorsed by quite a few faculty at Stanford, and then other universities followed that as well, and we're very thankful for that. Today, you're probably aware, there was a number of bills in the U.S. Congress that are pending, that are under deliberation. One in particular, we wrote to the leadership in Congress very recently, in fact, a week ago, less than a week, asking them to basically opposing the reinstatement of the China Initiative under the Commerce, Justice, and Science Appropriations Act. There are other acts as well, so there is definitely a push to reinstate the China Initiative at the U.S. Department of Justice. And I think it is an enormous mistake for this country, and many of my colleagues share that opinion. And it is only driving away talent. It's not recruiting talent to this country, and that is really important. So I'll stop there.
Okay, thank you very much. We have met a number of times on Zoom to prepare for this forum, but we have never actually heard each other speak. Now that they have spoken, I'm going to ask you to give impression and give redirect on what the other people have said, and I'm going to go with Peter Z first.
Well, I mean, I'm just hearing from a different side of the coin. You know, I see it very anecdotally from individuals. You know, Peter and Scott see it from their colleagues in a much different perspective, the overall climate of fear that I can only just imagine, but I have imagined because it doesn't surprise me. I talk to these researchers on the phone, and they are very frightened and, you know, a little bit paranoid to the extent, I don't necessarily blame them, but I think the combination of growing up in China, which is, you know, a state where you don't have the same amount of rights or privacy, and there's an assumption that, you know, if these questions are asked, you know, that's it, it's all over. And, you know, you do have rights, you can answer, you can respond, you can make your case. And so it's not a gulag. I mean, you don't get, you know, they're not going to come away and take you away. But the damage that has been done is untold, and that's what you're hearing about. So, yeah, I don't think it can be overstated.
Okay, Scott, would you talk a little bit about, you know, your work in China and future cooperation, if there's any, and also your feedback to your colleagues here?
Yes. No, I think when we're talking, so I was involved in a track 2 diplomacy. It was 15 U.S. professors that work on China and 15 Chinese professors that work on the U.S. And it was, like I said, it was approved by the presidents of both countries, and we ended up, you know, writing a big report on it. But we met 4 different times, and again, I'm an empirical economist, so as everybody's making their comments, I'm writing down notes about what's the impact of this. And I wrote another in this volume that we put out, and that went to both presidents. One paper was the impact of collaboration and its disruption. The other one was collateral damage. And I think, and I wanted to ask Peter this, as sort of Peter M. Yes, exactly. You know, basically what it was everybody was saying, the problem is that when you start even to think about, should I do this collaborative research, is the first thing that happens is to say, oh, that's national security, or it might be a national security problem, right? And then it was from both sides. It was from the U.S. side and from the China side. And, you know, I kept saying, well, it should be very easy to do. Can't we just define what national security is? So what ends up happening is that there's all this collateral damage because everybody's going to sort of be very, very, very careful, you know, and take this definition of national security and move it out. Of these 15 professors that were in our group, 2 of us were still working in China, okay? Myself, and that's because I work on rural human capital. I work on rural babies now, on early childhood development. And I don't care how you define national security problem, a little baby from Sichuan is not a national security problem. And so we've been able to keep working, but all of these other groups, they've stopped their programs. And then I go to what I want to know from Peter is, on the other side, is I've heard it's very hard to get PhD students and postdocs in engineering and science from China because they can't get a visa. But on the other hand, I've heard lots of people say, yeah, that we don't dare get Chinese, we don't even want to go recruit them anymore because of the danger it might be. So do you know your colleagues, is this a supply or demand problem? Is it a demand from the Stanford side that the labs just don't want to recruit these students, or is it supply side problem that the U.S. won't give them a visa and so they go to Germany or Italy? What do you know from the Stanford side?
Well, again, rather anecdotal, but among my colleagues, at least in physics and some other departments I know, I would say each department at Stanford for graduate admissions determines that. It's not centrally controlled. It's each department, the faculty look at applications and try to select the best scholars to come. And I think in physics, as I mentioned earlier, there's been a decrease in, I'd say, the quality of some of the scholars that apply. So we've had fewer outstanding scholars coming from China. It's not because we don't want them to come. That's still the case. I know, at least anecdotally, of some students, not in my department, but some in other departments that were admitted, but they couldn't get visas. And a couple of cases like that. And also cases where they would get a visa, they could come, but they decided to go to another university in another country. In addition, I think the quality of education in China, Tsinghua University, for example, which I'm somewhat familiar with, is one of the top universities, not only in China, but in the world, and in areas particularly of quantum research on materials, for example. So there's great scholarship there, and I think there's an assumption built in to some of the dialogue I hear that information flow is only in one direction. That's not true. There's talent in both sides. That has to be recognized. And, we're a much smaller country. We have to, as you pointed out at the beginning, we're a nation of immigrants. The immigrant talent to this country has been crucial. Don't ever forget that.
One of the solutions I often heard, and with my experience in Lawrence Livermore, which is a weaponless laboratory, as you know, is to build a very tall fence over a smaller yard. From an academic point of view, from a legal point of view, is that possible? Who wants to take a first crack at this question? Can we kind of reduce the area that we be concerned about and build a very tall fence over it?
Let me just say one quick thing. It's defining that fence, right? And that's been the problem. We went to 7 different departments in the U.S. government, and we went to 5 different ministries in China and say, we want you to define that fence. What is national security? They won't do it. And so I think that's one of the problems is where does that fence go?
Yeah, I think this, the challenge, and I'm not an expert at this, honestly, because scientists don't know everything, even about science, so you tend to get rather specialized. But I think one of the issues is that I think there's a narrative, not entirely unjustified, that many technologies that are openly developed are also dual use. And again, I don't think that's so much a university problem as industry and how it's regulated. I think another area, just again anecdotal, I think this veil of national security gets applied a lot. And one word that I've learned, at least in Washington, seems to raise concerns, is if you use the word quantum, everybody runs for cover. And I think that is a huge mistake. It tells me they don't actually understand the subject, number one. And I think scientists, number two, have to actually make the effort to explain, how to make the big fences and so forth. It's effort by the scientific community as well. Most of my colleagues don't want to spend time thinking about what's going on in Washington, thinking about geopolitical issues. They just want to work in their lab and make breakthroughs. And I totally agree with them. However, I think we're in an age where one has to reach out more and try to educate members of Congress, the administration, and so forth. And I think there's been a lot of effort in that area. And I was going to particularly mention, I should have mentioned it earlier, I think the National Academy of Science of the U.S. has done a lot of work in this area. And a very recent report, which I would urge everybody to read, is on international talent recruitment. And it was a report that just came out a month or two ago, I think maybe a month ago, that was actually commissioned or commissioned by the United States Department of Defense. And I urge everybody, read it. It's got a lot of recommendations in it that I hope members of Congress will and the administration will pay attention to.
Peter Z., from a legal point of view, would you care to comment about strategy and how to...
I don't know that really applies to the Department of Justice. I mean, I do think that, conceptually, what I've always tried to urge the DOJ to do is to focus on cases involving actual theft. Intellectual property, proprietary information. There are instances of that. There are instances of people working for, they're not working in academia. They're working for private companies, and they download material, and then they leave their company, and they go to another company in Taiwan or China involving, oftentimes AI or something like that. And, theft is theft. It's nothing okay about that. But it's in a totally different context. And if, to the extent that DOJ could focus there, I think they should just, frankly, get out of academia, because from what I've seen, particularly when you're working with fundamental research, it's it's apples and oranges. It's just like the idea of theft doesn't even apply. The words, the terminology doesn't make sense in that context when the goal is collaboration. And so, what do you mean theft? I'm giving it away. I'm not stealing it. I'm publishing it. So, it's a missing. It's just a fundamental lack of understanding on the part of investigators about what the role of researchers is.
Okay, Scott, I still want to ask. I still want to ask you that question: is China a competitor, or are they our enemies?
There's, I would say that China is definitely not our enemy, and we don't want China as our enemy. That's right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a paper out that's unpublished paper that's going around now, and it shows that if we sanction China, like we sanctioned Russia 2 years ago, the economy of the U.S. would fall by 20 to 30% within 3 months. That's how intertied our economies are. I mean, and I think it's like 50 out of, there's 92 industries out there, major industries. 50 industries depend on China. By the way, China's economy would fall more than ours. I mean, that's how reliant China is on ours and the world economy. So we're intertied. Does that make us a competitor? Sure, we compete, right? But we're also collaborators, right? We collaborate on things, and I think that we're both of those things, and we don't want China to fail either. And so I think that that there's no more important thing to try to find a floor under which this relationship, has been drifting down, and start to rebuild it up.
Okay, Peter, I'm going to ask you another hard question. The economy of U.S. and China, we found out that we cannot decouple. So the word is de-risk. In the scientific field, I know you're not representing the whole scientific, but I'm asking you a personal experience. Can we decouple, or do we de-risk? And how to do this?
I'm familiar with that term de-risk, and often you may as well use the word decouple. Many of my colleagues, I'll just talk about my own experience. I was talking to somebody this morning about this. In an attempt to de-risk, you tend to try to put boundaries around things. And I'd say the biggest impact on me, it's not fear. I'm not that fearful of China and collaborating with people there. I do have some collaborators now with China. No problem for me, and I'm not worried about it. I think the main impact on me has been what I would call compliance fatigue. There are more and more regulations, more and more guidelines about this, that, and the other thing among all the different federal agencies. And some of them make sense, and a lot of them, it's just clear as mud. And I think that's something, we need some stability, the academic community. We got to stop this just heaping more driving things with fear rather than let's be sensible about this, slow down, let's get some stability and rebuild the relationship. So for me, that's the main impact. It's just, hey, am I allowed to do this or not? And I think university administrators are trying their best, at least I know at Stanford. I'd say some of the federal agencies do a better job than others. And I think that, to me, is the biggest impact. So de-risking, what are you de-risking at a university is what I'd like to know. It's not clear at all to me, really.
Okay. Are there any more comments on each other's presentation? If not, we can go to the question and answering period. And first of all, I would like to invite Professor Franklin Tao and his lovely wife, Honk, who flew in from Kansas University to come and say a few words about their case.